Good morning. Thanks for attending my talk. Today, my topic is brain-computer interface and control of manufacturing robots. I'm Kesavadas from University of Albany, State University of New York. But majority of this work that I'm presenting today was done at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I would like to reference the paper in JCISE that is primarily the topic of my talk. Is the first paper done with my doctoral student Yao Li, who has completed his graduation since then and is working as a postdoc at a university right now. This paper is titled SSVP-based brain-computer interface for part-picking robotic coworker. I'm also very briefly going to show some results from an additional paper as well to just complete this whole topic. I would also like to acknowledge National Science Foundation grant from NRI, Human Cognition Assisted Control of Industrial Robots for Manufacturing, award number 1464737. I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about the areas of robotics that I'm currently involved in. Currently, a lot of my work is looking at AI and machine learning, looking at industrial human-machine interface, and also looking at robotic assistance for medical robotics. So let me just start by just giving a brief overview of my work. Here on the left-hand side is a robot we are working to do breast biopsy. This robot is capable of automatically recognizing different types of tissue so that it will help for cancer. The second is work that I've been involved in more than 15 years, and that is training robotic surgeons for Da Vinci and other robotic systems. A system called ROS that was developed in my lab and commercialized and is used in many hospitals and medical colleges around the world today. Another example is a human type robotic system for inserting catheter for cardiac and brain surgery. Here's an example of that project. On the right-hand side video, you see it being simulated to go inside what is known as the bovine arch of the heart. And using AI, this robot can automatically access inside the heart, just like a human being would do. And this was trained using human beings. So having said that, let me now also show that some other work that we've been involved in. This is a work I'm working with Plaza Ferreira at UIUC in creating a very small size robot for laparoscopic surgery. So today's topic is looking at human-machine interface in robotics. So I will break this into 4 parts. First, I will talk about the need for better human-robot interaction. Then I'll give you 2 examples of the work that we have developed. And then we go into a little bit about different techniques that we have used for identifying signals and some contributions that we have made into that space. And finally, a look at how robots can be used to understand human emotion. So let's start about human-robot interaction collaboration. So increasingly, robots are there everywhere, whether you go to a warehouse of a delivery center like Amazon, or you go into an operating room in a hospital. Robots are really they're everywhere. And with robots participating in the human environment, the question is, how can human communicate better with the robots? And there are a number of reasons for this. One is, of course, safety. And traditionally in industrial settings, you have more control about the safety. You can put different kinds of tripping systems and so on and so forth. But once you have a robot actually working with you as a part of your day-to-day environment, then safety becomes a bigger issue. The second is how can you make robots understand your intention, right? I mean, if you have a human worker working with you, I mean, you always communicate verbally, non-verbally your intentions, and people understand what you're trying to do, right? When you have a robot doing that, how can you make that easier, right? So my thought is that the next generation of industrial robots as well, it's not going to be systems that is completely pre-programmed. While it may also be true that in a very large manufacturing environment, you would still have robots with good feedback control systems and with good sensors and so on and so forth, doing really automated work. But think of manufacturing domains where you want robots to be collaborating with human in a somewhat of an unstructured environment. These environments, we do already see robotic systems, helping people in auto industry in lifting heavy objects and things like that. But in the same line, how can we make systems that is even more in tune with the human being and the thought process is what we are trying to get at. So the question here is, can robots actually tap into your thinking process in your brain so that even without gestures or verbal interactions, can robots understand your thought process and react to it and complete some task you want to do? That was the original thought of our research. And of course, there are many reasons why this might be helpful. One might be that you could get industrial workers, also people from a wider background, in people who may have some disabilities could now also participate in manufacturing, for example. Also help elderly population by non-verbal cues and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of very interesting things, right? So to learn from reading from the brain itself, it's been a big area of research, especially in the medical domain for the last 20, 25 years. And there are two types of sensors to read from the brain. One is the most invasive of them, where the electrodes are put right in different cortex of the brain and collect signals to convert them into neuromuscular activities. Here on the right-hand side is a great experiment 10, 15 years back at the University of Pittsburgh, where a person who was completely disabled from neck down could actually control a robot to feed herself by simply thinking about it, and robot could understand it and do those. While these are very attractive options, but it requires invasive sensors, and obviously in an industrial application, it's not a possibility that someone is going to let you put a lead into your brain. So you have to look at sensors that are placed over your head. These are non-invasive EEG sensors, like the one on the right-hand bottom picture. And you can still pick up signals. It is not as accurate as the sensors in the brain. Nevertheless, it gives you good feedback. So let me jump to my
in this video,
work. I'm going to play the small video.
Brain or mind-controlled robotic systems developed at the Virtual Reality Lab at University at Buffalo. A human operator is trained to control various actions of the robot by thought process. Complex trajectories are broken down into simple mental commands using a grammar system called acteams. The task being demonstrated here is to successfully insert a peg into a hole. First, the user is shown imagining a push action. Next, the user is applying motion similar to rotation. Finally, by combining these two basic motions, the task is completed successfully. Most participants in our study were able to learn the grammar-based mental instructions in less than 1 hour. One unique aspect of our study is that we were able to implement a mind-controlled robotic system using non-invasive EEG sensors.
So this work was actually our earliest work that I did when I was at University of Buffalo. And this result was very encouraging, and that actually led us to getting a grant from National Science Foundation to explore this idea and expand it further. And we looked at two industrial applications. One was welding, and the other was pick and place type work. So let's start with welding robotic work that we envisioned, and we actually completed this project. So here we used a concept called steady state visual evoked potential, SSVEP. So what is SSVEP? So in a human brain, when you are given a visual stimuli, usually the stimuli is less than 10 hertz. It actually creates, it evokes a potential in the brain, right? So like, for example, if you watch at a LED light, which is blinking at 6 hertz, and if you keep staring at it, it actually sends a signal in the brain that actually can be captured using external brain-computer interface. So this was the idea we thought will convert into an industrial application. So what we did was, if you look at the bottom, there are, on the left A picture, you see it's two parts being welded. Now, obviously the horizontal line in the middle is where the welding is supposed to be done. But there are other edges as well, and any one of the edge could be a welding a length, right? So, so what we're trying to do here is we put this welding in front of a visual system like a camera, and then it automatically identifies all the edges that could be welded, and then it starts blinking at a frequency that can actually trigger an SSVEP. And human operator watches this, and the moment he or she identifies the welding length, then it automatically sends a signal to the robot, and the robot comes and picks it up and then welds it. So let's watch this. So here is an experimental setup. On the right-hand side, we have a simulated robotic system that is used a lot for training purposes. We took that welding gun, and then we connected it to a KUKA robot, U-bot. And then as it physically does that on the computer, it simulates the welding process. So we really don't need a welding system here. So we took that and created this experimental setup. And then we try to implement this and see that if this actually works. You'll see in the left picture here, there's this welding system and with the camera attached to it. And the camera can go and look at the welding area and pick up all the edges that is potentially ready for welding. So let's look at this system working. So here, the operator is wearing the HMD and is looking at the light blinking, and you will see that very shortly. It actually goes, the camera picks up the welding area, and then it starts creating this SSVP frequency signals onto that. And then as it blinks, the operator picks up the edge by staring at it for about 10 seconds. And the moment, so you can see this edges now, it's automatically picking up different edges. So it picked up two. Now this is the one you want to weld, the middle one, right? So the operator actually looks at the middle one while it doesn't focus on the other ones. And this information is sent to the robot, and the robot now goes and starts actually moving and welding this operation. So this system we developed, and we did some human subject test on that. So for signal capturing, we used a system called canonical correlation analysis, also known as CCA. It basically picks up all the data from about 18 different sensors, and using this data, we can create a threshold. And the threshold tells that if there is a peak, then it's above a threshold, then it sends a signal. And if it's below, it is idle state. If it's an idle state, then it does not create any signal. So initially, we started with this approach called CCA. We tested that on 3 subjects. They were initially trained to use the SSVP concept. And then they were provided with 5 different experiments where they were required to look and identify the welding edge, and then the robot had to do that. And we see that the 2 other subjects, we are quite successful. They're able to complete 85 to 90% of time correctly. robot was able to weld the right edge simply by reading from the brain. But in one of the subjects, the results were not good. There could be a number of reasons, everything from being the leads not being attached properly in the head to the subject not completely understanding the concept of looking at welding and identifying the right edge. We actually extended this work to see if we can generalize this, not just on horizontal lines, but can we create multiple welding directions? So this itself was an interesting project where we created a number of different 3D printed printed welding directions, like the one you see in B and D, and then we created some algorithms to use computer vision to automatically recognize those edges that could be welded, and then pulling all the edges and creating SSVP just like we did with the vertical direction. In fact, we tried out many different ways, including standard edge direction techniques, use the mask RCNN, deep lab, and so forth. You see the figures in the bottom. These are automatically recognized data, and the one on the right gives us the best result, and that was based on the deep lab product. So let me continue moving forward now with the focus of this paper that was trying to see if we can now apply this to picking up defective part from a robot. And let me explain the experiment to you first. The way this experiment works is that, and the idea behind that is that there are a number of parts moving on a conveyor. There's a human operator constantly looking at these parts moving in the conveyor. Now, there are randomly a few parts which are defective. And once you find a defective part, the robot, that information, the one that human recognizes is now communicated to the robot, and the robot goes and picks up that object alone. To do this experiment, we set up a conveyor system, and we picked up these bolts as an example, and we created a few bolts which do not actually have a head in it. So those are defective parts. And the human operator would drop parts on the conveyor. This is the second operator, and the part will start moving while the person who's wearing the head mounted, BCI, keeps staring at the parts as it is moving in the conveyor, right? So instead of directly staring on the conveyor, what we did was we put two cameras, one camera in the front. So as soon as the part appears, that is captured in the picture and is put into one of the 4 images on the monitor. As you see, there are 4 images. So each image is a part. And then each image is now flickering at a different frequency. And then as part keeps moving, the operator stares at the screen and looks at different parts. And when he or she identifies one of the blocks which is blinking, and if he recognizes that as a defective part, then the BCI picks up and our algorithm picks that information, sends to the robot. And then as the part comes close by, the second camera is now looking at this object. Then we do an algorithm, which I'll talk very briefly, and then pick that up, part automatically and remove it. So this is the experiment. So there are 2 cameras in the robot. So let's watch this in action. So the first part is in, and so you see the picture of that. Then the second part came through, that's blinking. Now the third parts were introduced. So the third part is blinking. Now the fourth part is introduced, is blinking. So they're all good parts. The robot is not doing anything. And then as the first part goes away, the first picture is swapped. So new pictures keep emerging while the user is constantly staring at it. But one part was defective. An operator did recognize it, so robot immediately went and identified and grasped it. So I will just play this back a little bit. Let's look at that again. You see that the next part which is coming in doesn't have a bolt head, and the user has already recognized that and picked it up. So an information has been sent that the part number 4 is defective, so it goes and picks it up and it removes it and throws it. So this is a really good working system, and it has an elaborate algorithm which starts with the new part entering, and a grasp planning is already created for the part. The moment the part comes in, then the picture is snapped and sent to the monitor, and then it is put on a computer screen. That's a display here. Then from the display, the part is sent. The operator looks at it and stares it, and if it is defective, then he stares it for longer. If it is not, it does not stare at that. And if it is defective, then it goes to decision. And then the rear camera picks it up and detects the part and then throws it out. And we also developed an algorithm behind it, which we call it the Twofinger random grasp algorithm, where we start with 2 points, and then we keep changing randomly those 2 points till we find an ideal grasp situation. In the bottom, you see this being applied, this algorithm being applied to various industrial parts, and you can see that if it's a 2D object that is graspable, we can always find a good grasping system, and it is quite fast. We can calculate this algorithm in a matter of a second. So by the time the part goes from the camera 1 to camera 2, the grasp plan is already prepared. Now let's jump a little bit on to some algorithms behind what we did. So from the BCI perspective, like I mentioned, the objects for getting the SSVEP need to be flashing at a frequency, generally, like I said, below 10 hertz. So each of the images on the screen, the 4 of them that we place at 4 different frequencies: 6 hertz, 6.67, 7.5, and 8.57 hertz. And then there is an idle state as well. So when a user looks at an image which is flickering 6.67, that SSVP is sent to the brain. Now, to recognize that, there are many different techniques. If you are working in the area of BCI, you will know that you could use and signal processing. You could do SVM. There is in various different, and also I mentioned CCA that we used for a welding robot application. But for this project, we wanted to improve the efficiency of that, and we created a new algorithm which we call CNN CCA, and I will talk about that a little bit. So CCA, as I mentioned, is basically it's known as canonical correlation analysis, where all the 18 sensors are taken and then in a canonical form, and then the algorithm basically tries to find out if it is below a threshold set, it is idle, which means that the robot doesn't do anything, or there is nothing happening. If it above threshold, it actually looks at a peak. To improve that, we actually developed something where we combine a convolution neural network with CCA, and the diagram below actually shows how we did it. The paper actually has a little bit more detail on why we designed our CNN the way it was, where we have 4 different layers, and each layer does something to improve the performance. And there's a reference signal like shown in the bottom. And then at the very end, when we get a binary result, we pass it through. Now we pass it through a CCA, and we send the results out to do that. This approach, in fact, we found was very effective. We again had a study which we did with 3 subjects, where 10 parts were passed in the conveyor, and they were asked to recognize, and there were 2 of them were defective. And everywhere you see green as the parts are moving, means that it was a defective part, and the user was actually able to identify. The ones you see in orange or red are the ones they missed. So you see that that results were very good for 2 of the subjects. They got it almost every time. In fact, 100% of the time. One of the subject was not able to pick up twice, but was able to do 80% of the time. Now, we also did an offline experiment with 5 subjects and 5 runs to compare our CNN algorithm with several other traditionally used algorithms. These figures show that for each subject, we see that in the very top, the blue line is our algorithm, and the one below are the 5 other traditionally used algorithms. we can see that CNN-CAA actually outperformed all the other algorithms that's currently used in BCI for recognizing this kind of SSVP signal. And for subject 1, 2, 4, and 1, 2, and 5, it actually performed very well. And the subject 4 did not perform that well. However, we see that it still outperformed the other 4 algorithms. So this is quite an encouraging thing. And at the very end, I will also share a GitHub site where you can go and download our entire CNN-CCA code, and it's available for you to try it out for your own research projects. Okay, now let me finally come to my concluding topic, and that is how can BCI robots can be used for human emotion study. Here, there's a lot of applications of that. If BCI can, if BCI can pick this information, then it may have some value in mental health, in identifying if people are stressed out in an environment, say like in a nuclear plant or in an aircraft. Are people very stressed out? If that information is available, you could use that to alleviate some of the information. That is what was our focus. So what we wanted to do here was to see if a robot can learn from BCI that the person who's operating it is stressed out. And if we can do that, then the robot can shut down the system or take an evasive action to not scare the person, right? So we took 5 subjects and we did this test. The test was this robot, keeps repeating a simple exercise. It just goes up and goes down. It's non-threatening, very simple. And as the user, you keep watching it and nothing happens. But then suddenly the robot does something completely unexpected. And just as we predicted, when that happens, the operator suddenly is woken up, and then the robot recognizes that this operator is stressed out, and then it shuts it down. So let's watch this video. As you can see, this robot is performing a very simple action. It's just going up and going down. So nothing is happening. And the operator, is sitting there. Operator doesn't even know that something is going to happen, right? Because we have not even warned them. By the way, we had an IRB approval for doing the study. And now suddenly it does something, and then we are actually able to, and the robot suddenly shuts down. And so the signal extraction is done, and we developed an algorithm where we can actually look at sudden panic in the brain, and if it crosses a threshold, it sends an information to the robot, and the robot immediately shuts down. So this is just a beginning. I will skip that for time. We have several classification techniques we used, but we got some really good results for doing that. Using SVR technique, we got very high correlation, and we were able to successfully demonstrate that it works. So finally, coming to a conclusion, I think that the BCI has application in many unstructured robotic environments. It can also be very helpful for identifying people who are stressed, and make the robotic system, automated system, be more adaptive to the user who's in the room, so that the robot can increase the speed or reduce the speed based on how well the robotic work is going on. Perhaps it's also got a very good application for surgery, where if a surgeon is very tired, the robot can perform at a different level. And this is the GitHub site. If you'd like, you could also email me, and I will send you the link for the GitHub site as well for our CNN-CAA technique. Acknowledgement. As I said, Dr. Yao Lee was my PhD student who worked on this. I want to acknowledge him, and also Dr. Pramod Chamberlain, who was initially involved with it, and also my other students. So I stop with here, and thank you very much for listening to my talk.